Juliana, thanks so much for joining me for a few minutes here. We're at IPPE in Atlanta. It's day one. It's been a busy show for all of us so far, but I do appreciate you sitting for a couple minutes with me and
Sure.
talking to me. Welcome to the meat industry officially. And given that, I wanted to ask you, what are some of your first impressions? You've been on the job now for a few months. The industry is a very unique industry. What are some of your first impressions of the industry and where we're at?
Well, that's a great question, because I have spent the last several months out in the meat industry community meeting members of the Meat Institute and seeing the operations at the plants, meeting with businesses, hearing about their stories, and so I am just bursting with the sort of excitement and information, newly gathered information about what our industry is all about, and so I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of that. I've been to almost 30 plants at this point, and to say that food safety, animal welfare, worker safety, all of those things as top line issues for our members. The opportunities that I have seen with the workforce in the communities, what they do to bring the right people into their labor force, keeping them, that all of these things were new to me. They were the way it makes a difference to the bottom line, how relaxed animals are before they go to the harvest floor, the seriousness with which everyone takes anything approaching a recall, and the possibility of a recall, that there would be all of these interventions, and they're somewhat proprietary. I mean, there are different ways that folks do things, but all of this has been tremendously helpful to me as I go out representing the industry and talking about the wonderful stories that I've seen at our right there on the in action with our members. Everyone does business together, so this is a very tight-knit, very intimate industry. They know each other, they've known each other for decades, people like each other, it's very relational. There's a great sense of community, not just in the industry, but in the communities where these businesses are located. I worked in production agriculture before, and I value very much farmers and ranchers for their practicality and their hard work ethic and a very attention to family. I'm finding the same thing, in the meat industry, and big companies, small companies, it's terrific. Lots of innovation. There's a strong entrepreneurial spirit, so particularly when you get to second, third, fourth, and even fifth generations of families and family businesses, and they get to take something that's their heritage and their legacy and then build on it. So that has been just so exciting and so much fun.
So if you think about the things you've seen and the positive things that you've pretty much reflected on here, has anything truly been a real eye-opener? Anything surprised you? I mean, you have a background in ag, so maybe there hasn't been, but is there anything that has really stood out, the 30 plants you've been to, or the groups you've met with, or the people you've met with? Is there anything that's just stands above and beyond?
I think there's a wow factor in every place I've walked in. And maybe it's because there's an old world production method that's still being used today in a salami, particular salami outfit in California. Maybe it is the innovation that there's a ton of technology and equipment that goes into the efficiencies and the food safety protocols and the worker protocols that make this whole thing run. And so those things get tweaked all the time, and so these businesses are nimble and those things are all, I mean, not terribly surprising, but really positive things that I just didn't know what to expect.
Okay. So the flip side of that, you're still learning and you're still getting to know what's going on at the plant level, but based on what some have told you and what you've seen, what are your top 1 to 2 priorities in terms of, saying something needs to be fixed means it's broken. Maybe that's not the word, but what are your short-term focus goals to improve? Where do you feel like you can fit best in the short term?
So the industry has challenges at the macro level that I think the staff at NAMI have already teed up. I mean, they're not just brand new challenges, but there are ways in which I would like to take what the good foundation that's already been built with the organization and its outreach to other organizations, to our other organizations in the animal production community, as well as in the food, retail, restaurant space, all working together and really that taking to the next level a lot of what we've already been doing. So in the advocacy arena, it would be working together on things like trade, opening markets. There's great demand for our high quality meat products from the U.S. There's we're efficient and nutritious. We have great markets out in the world. We need to be working with our government as much as possible to maintain access and also building those relationships globally. So that's a huge priority for all of us. The other things that are challenges come along with regulation and with sometimes the attacks on the meat industry that we're all familiar with. So there's a consumer element to understanding how we do what we do, and as we have said to ourselves, how do we tell the good story of the improvements that have been made in the areas that we know about inside the meat industry, so that our consumers are very comfortable with the way we raise animals, the sustainability of our operations, and how we treat our workers and their families. Other areas that we need to work on: what is our relationship to the environment? So we've had a lot of discussion recently about climate change again, and there has been a report issued within the last few weeks by an organization called Eat Lancet that purports to put forward a diet that is healthy for humans and healthy for the planet. We disagree that this is the diet that we should be following, and we disagree with the process and the underlying methodology for how they got there. These kinds of things are just going to keep on happening, so we really need a comprehensive and long-term strategy with how to deal with what we know to be a well-produced, wholesome animal protein that is important for any human's diet.
And I'm glad you brought up that report, because that was going to be my next question is, without giving away necessarily the plan, so they can plan to respond, what are the plans? What is the response? What types of investment in resources, not just monetary, but investment in resources are you guys going to be putting forward in terms of responding to that? And NAMI has always had a response. Is there anything different that's going to happen with this particular one?
Well, we expect that this will be a sustained long-term effort by this commission, and there are other reports on various aspects of our food production system outside of just animal agriculture that we expect will continue to press forward on changes that aren't as informed as they need to be. So we've tried to identify the experts that need to be at the table. Help those experts get connected to those resources and be in those conversations as much as possible. We cannot be absent from the conversation. We can't be absent from the World Economic Forum, from the various communities at the United Nations and all of these international, globally focused efforts. We have to be there, and we have to have credible scientific efforts that we know to be reliable and believable and accurate, participating in those conversations. So our job, I believe, is to continue to address what we can in the press, talk to our government leaders, our university academic community, who know what the story is on animal protein in the human diet, and ensure that they know where these opportunities are and that they're present at least to be part of the conversation.
And I would assume the same approach applies to the plant-based meats and the cell-based meats and the alternative meats as well, correct?
Absolutely. We have lots of opportunities, I think, in the future to address how the cell-based meat alternatives are going to be labeled and regulated, as well as the plant-based. Two different regulatory agencies at work here, FDA and our Food Safety Inspection Service at USDA. And we need to make sure that when the cell-based products are ready to come to the consumer, because they're coming, and they will be available, I think, much sooner than I knew before I joined the Meat Institute. If it meets the definition of meat, it needs to be regulated post-harvest at USDA, and we need to have appropriate labeling. And we believe that's really what levels the playing field and makes consumer choice a legitimate choice and doesn't mislead our consumers.
So thinking a little more long-term, a little more broad, what are your overall goals? Which sounds like a really vague question, and you could go anywhere with this, but you took this position, and so I'm sure you weren't thinking in the short term when you took it. What is your hope for the long-term future of the Institute under your guidance?
We at the Institute spend a great amount of our staff resources and time really engaged directly with our members on their day-to-day issues. If someone has, we're an industry that is highly regulated. We have government inspectors in our plants every day. So when those issues come up, questions, we do troubleshooting. And so I think it's sort of a foundational thing, and it goes without saying that the organization is going to be doing excellent work, and we will have the resources, the staff resources, to provide that service to our members and non-members going forward, because it's for the good of the entire industry. Nobody wants a food safety problem. Nobody wants an animal handling issue. So that goes without saying. I would like us to think as an industry, and I want to draw on as many conversations and resources as possible to think about where does the industry see itself in the next decade. We would love to have answers to questions about whether things like Prop 12 in California will be permitted on a state-by-state basis, which would cripple the animal agriculture industry as it is currently configured. We need the Supreme Court to answer that question for us. We need to think about how we discuss with consumers what they need to feel in order to enjoy our products. People, I'm convinced, most people, not all people, most people want to feel good about and enjoy their animal protein products. Bacon, It's a favorite.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Right.
People want to feel good about it. And so what do we need to do as an industry, and not NAMI by itself, but the entire chain, what do we need to do to help consumers feel comfortable? And it doesn't have to be in NAMI's name. We need to have the tools available to be able to do that, so that 10 years from now, we can look back and say, we really made a difference, and we didn't have to play whack-a-mole with Eat Lancet or with Prop 12 or with an antibiotic ordinance in San Francisco, that we really changed fundamentally the way consumers and citizens feel about the way their protein is produced.
To that point, I've always kind of said to processors and folks that I've come across is there's such a silent majority of meat eaters out there. And it's almost a catch-22 because activating them makes them not silent anymore. But how do you get them to that silent majority of consumers that meat is part of their day-to-day life? They go to the store, they buy a burger, they buy bacon for breakfast, or they buy, whatever, anything, a roast, chicken wings, this and that, but they think nothing of it. They just, that's part of their lives. How do you get that message to be the dominant noise out there, noise being in this case a good word, whereas what we hear is so much of the minority, the loud minority, that either wants to put the industry out of business at its worst, or just has the choice they don't want to eat meat, and that's okay, but they're the loudest people. How do we as an industry make that silent majority be heard better?
It's the $64,000 question, right?
Right.
I think I prefer and I believe that positive messages are really, really important. Fear-mongering doesn't work. I think that's what the anti-meat cadre of organizations, I think that's where they go. As much as we have felt like we have learned just talking science doesn't work with consumers, we still need the science. We still need to be able to point to those credible, believable, articulate sources that say, you know what, this is okay, and it tastes good. But I think it's got to be a little bit of the meat industry itself saying, we're all about continuous improvement. Yes, we have learned from episodes throughout history how we can do better. Look at how we've improved, and look at our commitment to doing more of that. This industry, and it's amazing to me how adaptable and nimble and it's all very consumer driven. You customer, even if you're not the end customer, I mean the end consumer, the person, the human being, but anybody buying the product, you tell me what you want and how you want it to look and how you want it cut, I'm going to provide it to you. So there are a lot of things that I think the meat industry can do in formulation and nutritional issues that we are just scratching the surface with how we talk about these things. So I think there's a lot to do. Do we have any silver bullets? No. It's going to take a lot of work, but I think that the organization under Barry Carpenter's leadership and with the mergers that have happened over the last few years is very well positioned to have a united voice, to have, many hands make light work. If everyone can have the same tools and really say the same things, I think that goes a long way toward contributing to a better understanding of how sustainable we are and really how much pride folks in the meat industry have about what they do. Great.
Juliana, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the show. I'm sure you're running around more than I am.
Well, it's an impressive show. It is huge. I was walking through yesterday when it was still being put together, and it was just a hive of activity. And then we have thousands and thousands of people here today. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I was out on the floor today, and the attendance looks pretty good, even in the back end of one of
Yeah.
the halls, which, sometimes on day one that people don't quite get there, but I looked around and there's people,
Yeah.
there's a decent amount of people back
We
there.
have
so.
we have more registered attendees starting than we had last year, and
Okay.
we have another hall open. So it's tremendous. It's growing every year.
Great. Thanks again so much, appreciate it.
Thank you.